Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor to You Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit their website, which is tutortoyou.net/sociology, and there you can pick up revision guides, flashcards, revision videos, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. The Sociology Show podcast is also sponsored by Collins, high-quality student books, teacher guides, and unbeatable value revision for GCSE and A-level sociology products. And so if you want to see what they've got on offer, then please do visit collins.co.uk/sociology show and enter the code sociology show at the checkout. So without further ado, let's go over to the interview. Hi, welcome to the Sociology Show podcast. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do, please?
Well, thanks for having me, and appreciate your interest in our work. And my name is Michael Flaherty. I'm a sociologist, and my area of special interest is time and the social organization of time and how people experience and attempt to manipulate their experience of time.
Thank you. And you, whereabouts are you based, Michael?
I'm a professor of sociology at Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida, and I have a courtesy appointment with the University of South Florida in Tampa, across the bay in Florida here.
Lovely. I would say, what's the weather there like? But I think we just established before recording that it's actually hotter in the UK than Florida today.
I'm afraid it is. It's always hot and humid here this time of year. I'm afraid your weather is even worse than that, but I hope it changes quickly.
Thank you. I always start by asking people how they got into their sort of area of specialism. And you just mentioned about time, and I know we're going to talk about crime and prison as well. But how did you get into your sort of niche area of time in relation to sociology, Michael?
Well, it started in graduate school, Matthew. I was sitting in a seminar one day when my mentor, Norman Denzin, walked into the room, and he had an excerpt from an interview with a American football quarterback. And the quarterback noted that in the middle of games, it would suddenly seem as if everyone was moving in slow motion. And my mentor was intrigued by this, and I was too, but I was busy with a very different doctoral dissertation and research project on top of that, neither of which had anything to do with time. So I just filed it away, and then after I graduated and took my first job, I started pursuing how people experience time, and especially being interested in distortion in the perceived passage of time and attempts to shape, manipulate, or control one's experience of time.
Do you want to go into a little bit more detail about that? Because that's fascinating. You know, in our daily lives, whatever we're doing, time often seems to be slower or faster than it actually is. And you just mentioned the example of the footballer. So what is the kind of phenomenon behind how we experience time?
It's a fascinating area, and it's where I have done most of my research. I think what we find is that our perception of time varies, and that's interesting because there is a standard system of time. And you and I made a time to meet today, and here we both are, and that's possible because of time zones and minutes and hours and dates and so forth. And so we have this social system of of timekeeping, and it's very much tied to our cultural arrangements. And it's standardized. It's standardized so that people in different places can coordinate their actions with one another. Despite that system, however, we find ourselves experiencing time in a distorted way. And I say distorted because we find ourselves experiencing it in a way that is not in keeping with the standardized time of minutes and hours or days of the month. And primarily, of course, this means that we experience time passing either very slowly compared to the clock or very quickly compared to the clock. Both of these would be distortions in our perceived passage of time. And they would be subjective because it's me or you or that quarterback who's experiencing time distorted. And we know that that's not true for other people. The quarterback knows that the seconds and minutes of the game are passing as they always do according to the clock, and that it's his perception of the passage of time that is modified. Why? My research shows that it has to do with our concentration, and that concentration can be arrived at in different ways. You can arrive at concentration through suffering and intense emotion. The intense emotions can be positive or negative. So the fear and rage can slow time down, but so can your first kiss on the Avenue of the Americas. Violence and danger slow our perception of time, but also waiting and boredom. And so I make that point because, especially when we go to prison, it doesn't have to be a lot happening. It doesn't have to be a football game. It doesn't have to be combat for time to slow down. It can be sitting in a doctor's waiting room or sitting in a prison cell. But it can also be massive concentration. For example, when an Olympic athlete, a gymnast, let's say, or a downhill skier tells us, as they often do, that in the midst of something that actually happens very quickly, downhill skiing or a gymnastics move, they perceive the time, like the NFL quarterback, to be passing very slowly. And this has to do with them massively concentrating on each fraction of a moment in a way that is abnormal. Typically, we don't bring that kind of level of concentration to our interaction.
Just as you were saying that, and I was just thinking about my own experiences. Is there any evidence, and this might be totally wrong, but if it's something fear or negative, it feels like time's going slower. So if you're waiting for a driving test or an exam, or you're nervous about getting married and you're checking the clock every 5 minutes, whereas if you're in the flow of something and really enjoying it, it tends to go quicker. So is there any evidence that negative experiences slow time down, but positive speed it up?
I think the evidence seems to be more mixed than that and more interestingly complicated, because, as I said, I have data where someone says that time slows down for them when they fall in love at first sight, or when they are kissed for the first time by a boy that they have a massive crush on. And so you're absolutely right. You can bring about time distortion or the slowing of the perception of time by suffering, torture, for example, or imprisonment. But you can also bring it about with rapturous levels of pleasure, sexuality, drug-induced experiences, especially the psychedelics, and so forth. I think the generalization that you're referring to happens because the real normal kinds of enjoyment, I think you said being in the flow of things, what often happens is you lose track of time because you're not having to be self-conscious or think about it. And so you wind up concentrating, again, being the fundamental idea, on what you're doing, but without being self-conscious about it, as you are when you're suffering. And that leads to a kind of you losing track of time or a compression of time. And you're like, wow, it's been 3 hours, but it seems much shorter than that. And that happens in kind of what we might call routine forms of activity, and also routine forms of a pleasure or enjoyment. More extreme forms of pleasure or enjoyment, falling in love at first sight, and first kiss with someone that you have a mad crush on, leads to a very different place, which is time slowing down because of the massive concentration that occurs.
And I wanted to link it to culture as well. I wondered if there's any evidence of this, but I wonder if cultures are very different in sort of their attitudes towards time and how they experience time. I was just thinking for myself, in the UK, we're fairly punctual. If you go to Germany, they're very punctual. I've lived in Spain and I've lived in Kenya, both far more lax in terms of their attitudes to doing things on time or when you need to be somewhere. And they seem to have this idea of having more time. You know, if you sit down for an evening meal, that can take 2 or 3 hours and you're expected to take your time over it.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a great question, because it points us to the fact that time is sociological and very much culturally diverse, as you were suggesting. Northern European countries, the UK, Scandinavia, Germany, and so forth, are very punctual, as you were saying. Southern European countries, Spain, Portugal, less so. Countries, developing countries such as Kenya in Africa, some Latin American countries, the Mideast, all of these places much less punctual. And ironically, these folks, as you noted, seem to have all the time in the world, but we in the more developed part of the world seem to have a time famine.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mañana is always the word in Spain. You know, something can wait till tomorrow. And in Kenya, poli means slow down. And often the Kenyans said that to the sort of British expats, poli, slow down. Why are you in such a rush? Yeah.
That's a nice example. Yeah, I think the pace of life is a fascinating aspect of it. And that varies quite a lot. Also, when things happen, you probably noted the very different times people eat in Spain.
Yes. I wondered how much of it was purely climate related. You know, hotter the country, the more likely you are to slow down.
It could be. The northern climates tend to be more time conscious, more ruled by the clock. I could be the accident of history. The Industrial Revolution was very much organized by the clock, and its origins are in Northern Europe, in the UK and Northern Europe, other Northern European countries. And the Industrial Revolution imposed a cultural discipline on us. It's easy for us to say, well, Northern Europeans, because of the climate, more time conscious. But if you think back before the Industrial Revolution, what were most Northern Europeans? Well, they were agricultural peasants and probably not very time conscious. They didn't have clocks. They didn't know what time it was, and nobody cared. You had work to do, but it needed to be done before the sun went down, and how long you took and when you did it was nobody's business much. But once the Industrial Revolution occurs, and once a whole bunch of people have to come together in a factory to work at the same time in the same place, this imposed a real cultural discipline, and it changed the population. So I'm not sure that it's climate so much as it is perhaps the accident of history and the place that a very important change occurred, which is the modernization and the industrialization of society in the UK and Northern Europe.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
And let's connect then your research on time to your most recent book, The Cage of Days. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what it's about, how it got started and so on?
Well, I'm glad we had a little bit of time to talk about my previous research, because that actually led to this study of prison. As I said, my research has not been focused on criminal justice or prison. In the past, it was focused on the sociology of time and temporal experience. My co-author, who was in prison for more than 31 years in 12 different prisons, including maximum security, medium security, and minimum security prisons, he had decided he wanted to write a book about time in prison. He had been taking college courses via correspondence while he was in prison, and had come across my work on time. And he wrote a letter to me back in 2010. And the letter arrived in my mailbox at school, and it came out of the blue. I just picked a letter out of my mailbox, and to my surprise, it said on the back, "This letter has been mailed from the state prison." And tore the letter open, and I looked inside, and the letter said, "You study time, I do time. Would you like to collaborate?" And that was back in 2010. And so we started working together. There is a tradition, I guess, that I don't know that everybody knows, of convict criminology. And my co-author works out of that tradition. In convict criminology, someone in prison works with someone outside of prison to study prison. Or someone in prison gets out of prison, gets a PhD, and becomes a sociologist and studies prison from the standpoint of having been in prison and now out of prison. But in any case, I guess our book is a dialogue between my co-author, Casey Carceral, who has done, in fact, 2 books before ours in the tradition of convict criminology, with a criminal justice guy called Tom Bernard. And his outside guy died young, Tom Bernard, that is. And when he wanted to write the 3rd book about time in prison, as I said, he found me and reached out to me. And that's how we got started on this.
And I imagine if you are a prisoner, if you are an inmate, time is everything. I think you use the word obsessed, but you would be completely and utterly obsessed with time.
Well, this is it. I mean, for you and me and people on the outside, we have all of these other things that we need to do and places we need to be. But prisoners, for me, it was a unique opportunity because prisons are like some great diabolical experiment that no one would let me do. You know, if I tried this, if I said, let me see what happens to time by putting people in boxes, they would say, Michael, you can't do that kind of research. That's cruel and inhumane. But all of these prisons are like this gigantic experiment concerning what happens to time and temporal experience. Because, as I think you said, Matthew, you get imprisoned and suddenly time is all there is. And the prisoners are, for that reason, obsessed with time. And they make a kind of a unique subject matter for us in that way.
Mm. And I guess depending on the sentence that you're serving, you know, if someone was in for a relatively short time, a few months, I suppose you can challenge that, you can count it down, you can see the end in sight, you know, the light is at the end of the tunnel. But when someone's being put in for life or a really long sentence, that must completely distort what time actually means.
Exactly, yes. I mean, if someone is put into prison or jail, more likely for a really short time, it would be maybe more likely to be jail. let's say 3 months, 6 months, then you might do the cliche of making, counting off days of a calendar. But for most of the people in American prisons, that would be counterproductive because you don't really have any idea when you're going to get out. A lot of sentences are what we call indeterminate. You may have been sentenced to 5 to 10 years or 1 year to life, as in the case of the Black Panther George Jackson. Well, if you think about that sentence, 1 year to life, when are you going to get out? And the answer is you have no idea. Or we have sentences that are punitive in ways that really undermine the idea that time is being used in a very precise way for punishment. Aaron George is serving 603 years in Virginia for the murder of her husband. And so, when are these people going to get out? Well, you can't mark days off a calendar in that sense. In fact, what the long-term prisoners do is throw their watches away and throw their calendars away because paying attention to time becomes aversive.
And the other thing I was really interested in that you mentioned in the book is about the loss of control of time, because obviously the inmate's time is under the control of the prison officers, the prison guards, and that's a very difficult concept to get a head around, isn't it? That your time is not your own. Everything that's prescribed and told when you're going to be doing it is outside of the inmate's control.
This is a huge issue, Matthew, and it's a huge adjustment to anyone who goes into prison. When am I going to take a shower today? Whenever I want, basically, aside from right now, I guess. But whenever I decide I want to. When am I going to eat? Whenever I'm hungry. If I feel like I want to take a walk, I'll go outside and take a walk whenever I want to, or I'll go shopping. You and I, we have schedules and we have structures of temporal control. We have jobs and schools that we work at and so on and so forth. But the change that occurs when someone goes into prison is enormous and shocking and transformational. Because as you pointed out, once you go into prison, none of your time is your own anymore. I was naive about this issue at the beginning of our project, and I think I said at one point to Carceral, it must be nice to have so much time on your hands to work on our project. I guess I was feeling harried and short of time at the moment. And he came back and he said, no, it's not my time. I'm told when to eat. I'm told how long I have to eat. I'm told when I can take a shower. I'm told how long I have for the shower. I'm told when I can call someone on the outside. I'm told how long I can talk on the phone with them. In the morning, they turn the lights on and roust people out of the cells, and they don't ask you if you wanted to sleep some more. And at night, they turn the lights off for everybody, and they don't ask you if you want to keep reading that interesting book. And so you totally lose control over when the lights go on and off, when you eat, when you shower, when you talk to people, when you go out on the yard, if you go out on the yard, when you leave your cell, if you leave your cell. And this is an enormous change, a total loss of temporal autonomy. And so the prisoners, for you and me, time is a resource. I can decide what to do with my time this afternoon. What do I want to do? I could do this, or that. In prison, time is not a resource. Time is the weapon with which the state punishes prisoners, and it does so by taking all of their temporal autonomy away. And it's a quite severe form of punishment with a lot of repercussions.
Mm. And so I wondered if this is from my outsider looking in based on, TV programs and films I've watched, but I know a large number of prisoners want to take up jobs. Do you think that part of that is to get some sort of routine into the day, to get some sort of structure in, to maybe buy back a bit of time and a bit of onus over that time?
Oh, absolutely. I think during the pandemic, a lot of us during social isolation got a taste of what time is like in prison when a lot of online memes were posted about who knows what day it is, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like every day is the same. I stay home. I don't go out and go to work. I don't go to stores. I don't go to movies. I don't go to bars and so on. We all got a taste of it, but, we could go outside anytime we wanted to, basically. And for prisoners, of course, it's like that, only far worse. That's, in effect, sort of functional to lose track of time in prison because the days sort of blur by. And so instead of Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, it's Blursday. It's who knows what day it is, and nobody cares because we're not going anywhere. So that becomes a big issue for them. And a job, as you said, becomes functional as simply something to do. The trouble is there's not enough work in prisons for all of the prisoners, and many of the prisoners are not allowed to work for one reason or another. They're in trouble. They have tickets against them for behavioral infractions of one kind or another. And there's just not enough work for them. But if they can get work, they like it because it's an excuse to leave their cell. Prisoners without work have nothing to do except sit in their cell or maybe go to the general, area of the floor where they're allowed outside the day room if they're allowed out of their cell.
So for those that didn't have work, for those inmates and everyone else, actually, what sort of techniques did they use to fill up their time?
They're really ingenious about working back against the system. I mean, I think to some extent they try to minimize the length of their sentences, especially the way they talk and think about their sentences. Sentences are referred to as a stretch, a bit, a spot, all kind of small, not important kinds of things. In America, in American money, we have nickels and dimes, which are small, almost worthless coins. And so a 5-year, a nickel is 5 cents and a dime is 10 cents. A 5-year sentence becomes a nickel, a small, almost worthless coin. A 10-year sentence becomes a dime, a small, almost worthless coin. And so there's a way of talking that kind of puts psychological distance between the prisoner and the sentence. I mean, instead of thinking, oh my God, I've got to serve 10 years, how am I going to ever do that? The judge gave me a dime. And it's a very different way of talking and thinking about it. So they use linguistic techniques like that to diminish their sentences. They use mental time travel. One of the prisoners in our book refers to it as autistic thinking. He's sitting in a cell, but in his own mind, he's building a house on an island. And he thinks about every nail and every piece of wood that has to be sawed and put together, and how the water would be and the plumbing. And hours later, a whole bunch of time has passed in a fairly pleasant way. And so in a way, he's escaped prison through mental time travel. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. They try to build novelty into their routine. Albert Woodfox talks about how he was in his cell basically 23 hours a day, 24 hours a day. And so he would sometimes, he would say, spend months standing when he ate at the end of the bunk, and then spend months sitting at the table to eat, and then spend months sitting on the bed to eat. And he says plaintively toward the end, I always knew I was trying to trick myself, and it never really worked that much. But they try in small ways that they have control over to insert some control over their temporal experience, to create novelty or to create a temporal structure for themselves by getting a job, like you said. But if they don't have a job, what can they do? Well, they can do yoga in the cell. They can exercise in the cell. They can smoke if they're allowed to smoke. They can, ironically enough, since a lot of them are in prison for drugs, they can use drugs to help themselves pass the time more quickly. I think in a most concerning way, a whole bunch of the dysfunction of prison, and especially the violence, is a function of people trying to make time pass in a more interesting and exciting way. And so rather than view the violence as a product of dispositions or personalities, one should rather look at a lot of the violence as being precipitated by people who don't have anything better to do with their time and are just looking for some way of making the time more interesting, more exciting. Art Pepper talks about people beating other people up because they didn't have anything else to do.
Mm. I was just thinking as you were talking through that obviously for a lot of prisoners, they have experienced difficult upbringings, whether that's to do with poverty, violence, whatever it may be. And for those people to be left alone with only their own thoughts, I'm aware that many people keep busy to mask sort of concerns or worries, anxiety, stress, whatever it may be. So to be left alone with only your own thoughts in one place, that's quite a scary thought.
It is. I mean, in the early days of the prisons, in America, they were started by two religious groups that came over here, I think mostly from England, the Puritans, and then later on the Quakers. And they came up with two different incarceration models. The Quakers thought, well, we can throw a person into a cell by himself or herself and give them a Bible and not let them talk to anybody else. And they'll come around to reflecting on what they've done and read the Bible and become a better, different person. The Puritans didn't think that they believed in predestination, that the prisoners were essentially evil and were never going to be rehabilitated. And so they just beat them and tried to get them to conform to the rules through a lot of cruel physical punishment. A lot of people, when they hear these two models, think of the Quaker model as being more humane. But we know with a lot of studies that have occurred since the 1700s, when these prisons were created, that solitary confinement is really hard on people. They don't give you solitary confinement in prisons because it's easier. They punish people with solitary confinement because it's hard on most people. There are some exceptions. I think people, and you allude to this, I think, with a lot of inner resources. I mean, if you put a Dietrich Bonhoeffer in prison, he reads and writes books. But if you put a 19-year-old in prison who dropped out of school when he was 16, and then you put him in solitary confinement, that can drive that person mad.
Yeah, makes sense. And Michael, I'm just aware of time because I don't have the expensive Zoom setting. I only have the cheaper one. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to give out some details if people want to find out more about your work or if you've got an email address or Twitter or anything like that.
I'm not on Twitter, but I would be happy to hear from any of your listeners and to talk about our research further, my research on time, and especially, of course, the most recent book on time in prison, The Cage of Days. My email address is FLAHERMG@ECKERD.edu. You can find my webpage at Eckerd College in the sociology faculty. And I'm also on ResearchGate and so on. But I would love to hear from anyone any of your listeners who would like to discuss time, and especially time in prison, any further.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Michael, and good luck for all your future research as well.
Thank you, Matthew, for your interest in our book and for our conversation today. I really appreciate it.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.